My wife slapped me 17 years ago. I'm finally filing for divorce. 17 years ago, my wife slapped me during an argument. It didn't hurt physically. What hurt was what happened next. Every time I tried to talk about it, she cried. Not just tears, deep, sobbing, can't breathe crying. And somehow I ended up consoling her, apologizing to her, taking responsibility for her feelings about something that happened to me. That pattern didn't end with the slap. It became the blueprint for our entire marriage. For 17 years, I absorbed everything. I swallowed my feelings. I made excuses for her behavior. I told myself that's what love looks like. That's what partnership means. Next week, my lawyer is serving her divorce papers. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I'm listening to the part of myself that never got space in this marriage. This is the story of how one moment of violence became 17 years of emotional erasure. And how I finally found the courage to say, enough. Let me take you back. 16, maybe 17 years ago, we were in our 20s, 2 young kids at home, sleep-deprived, stressed, running on empty like most parents of toddlers do. We were arguing about something, I honestly don't even remember what, something mundane that felt massive in that moment because we were both exhausted and overwhelmed. And then it happened. She slapped me, not a playful tap, not an accident. A full, open palm slap across my face. The physical sensation barely registered. I'm a grown man. It didn't hurt in any meaningful way, but the shock, the absolute disbelief that this person I loved, this person I'd built a life with had just hit me. For a moment, time stopped. I looked at her, she looked at me, and I waited for something, an apology, horror at what she'd just done, acknowledgement that a line had been crossed. Instead, she just stood there, defensive, angry. Like I'd somehow provoked this, like I'd made her do it. And here's the part I'm most ashamed of. I brushed it off. I told myself it was nothing, that it didn't count, that women slapping men is just something that happens. I'd seen it in movies and TV shows my whole life. The dramatic slap, the audience laughs or gasps, and then everyone moves on, so I moved on. I told myself we were young, tired. She was dealing with postpartum hormones. We had 2 babies screaming at all hours. Anyone would snap under that pressure, right? I made excuses, I rationalized, I minimized. What I didn't do, what I never did, was acknowledge that what happened to me mattered. But here's what I've realized after years of therapy and self-reflection. The slap itself wasn't the real problem. The slap was a symptom, a visible moment of something much deeper and more insidious. The real damage came from everything that happened after. A few months after the slap, I tried to bring it up. Not to punish her. Not to throw it in her face during an argument, just to process it, to talk about what happened and make sure it would never happen again. I started gently. Hey, I've been thinking about that day when you... I didn't even finish the sentence before she started crying, not a single tear sliding down her cheek. Crying, deep, body-shaking sobs, the kind that makes you immediately want to fix it, to make it stop, to do anything to ease their pain. And I did. I stopped talking about my feelings and started managing hers. It's okay. I'm not mad. I just wanted to talk about it. Hey, it's fine, really. By the end of the conversation, I was the one apologizing for bringing it up, for making her feel bad, for not just letting it go, and that became the pattern. Every time I tried to express hurt or frustration or just a basic need to be heard, she cried, not manipulative crocodile tears, real crying. Genuine distress, which made it so much harder to navigate because she wasn't trying to manipulate me. She was genuinely overwhelmed by guilt or shame or whatever she was feeling. But the effect was the same. My feelings got buried under hers. I became responsible for her emotional state, for making sure she didn't feel bad about making me feel bad. Do you see how twisted that is? I couldn't be hurt without first making sure she was okay about me being hurt. I couldn't be angry without first soothing her anxiety about my anger. I couldn't express a need without first managing her feelings about not meeting that need. My inner life became secondary, an afterthought, something to be minimized and managed so it didn't inconvenience her. And I let it happen. I participated in my own erasure because I loved her, because I understood she was struggling. because every stage of life gave me a new reason to be patient. First, it was postpartum. After our second child was born, she was clearly struggling, not sleeping, overwhelmed, irritable, so I told myself, she's dealing with postpartum, her hormones are all over the place, I need to be understanding, I need to carry more of the load. And I did. I took on more childcare, more housework, more emotional labor. I became the shock absorber for the family. Then the kids got older and the excuse shifted. She's overstimulated. The kids are loud and demanding and she needs space. Okay, fair. So I handled more of the hands-on parenting, made sure she got breaks, managed the chaos so she could decompress. Then it was premenopause, then menopause, then stress from work, then anxiety, then depression. There was always something, always a reason why I needed to be more patient, more accommodating, more quiet, and I never questioned it, not really. Because these things are real, postpartum depression is real, menopause is real, anxiety is real. But here's what I failed to understand at the time. Those things being real doesn't mean I had to disappear. Someone else's struggle doesn't erase your right to have feelings, to have needs, to take up space. But I convinced myself it did. I convinced myself that being a good husband meant being silent. That love meant absorption. That partnership meant one person carrying everything so the other person could survive. And it shut something off in me. I hate that it did. I hate that years of this dynamic made me less empathetic toward people dealing with mental health issues. I know those struggles are legitimate. I know people suffering from depression or anxiety or hormonal changes aren't choosing to be difficult. But I also spent 17 years being told that someone else's mental health meant mine didn't matter, that their bad day justified treating me however they wanted, that I had to accept whatever came my way because pointing it out would be insensitive to what they were going through. And that broke something in me, made me harder, more cynical. I resent that. I resent what this marriage did to my capacity for compassion. You know what I never did? Not once in 17 years. I never gave an ultimatum. I read all the relationship advice, all the articles and books and think pieces about healthy communication. And they all said the same thing. Ultimatums are toxic. Ultimatums are manipulative. Ultimatums are the last resort of relationships already dead. So I never said, if this doesn't change, I can't do this anymore. I never said, I need you to meet me halfway or this won't work. I never drew a line in the sand and said, this is non-negotiable. But here's what I've learned. There's a difference between a manipulative ultimatum and a healthy boundary. A manipulative ultimatum is, if you don't do exactly what I want, I'm leaving. A healthy boundary is, I cannot continue living this way, something has to change. I never enforced the second one because I was terrified that if I pushed, she'd spiral, terrified that she'd break down completely and the kids would suffer, terrified that I'd be responsible for destroying our family. So I kept the peace. I swallowed everything. I stayed silent. And I became the functional core of our family by default. I cooked every meal. For 17 years, breakfast, lunch, dinner, every single day. I handled the house, the repairs, the maintenance. The endless list of things that break and need fixing. I managed most of the bills, most of the finances, most of the logistical labor of keeping a family running. She contributed, I want to be clear about that. She worked. She helped. But if I'm being honest, if I'm telling the story from my perspective, it felt like 25% to my 75%. That's MY's side. She'd have her own version, her own percentages, her own list of things she carried that I didn't see or appreciate. And that's fair, that's valid, but from where I stood, I was drowning. And every time I tried to say, I'm drowning, I had to first make sure she didn't feel bad about me drowning. The kids are older now, teenagers, more independent. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I have space to think, to breathe, to actually look at my life instead of just surviving it, and what I see breaks my heart. I see a man who spent 17 years erasing himself, who convinced himself that love meant silent suffering. That partnership meant one person carrying the weight so the other could float. I see a man who never got space to be upset, who never got permission to be hurt. who never got to take up room in his own marriage. And I finally understand this isn't sustainable. This isn't what I want for the rest of my life. I don't want to spend the next 30 years walking on eggshells, managing someone else's emotions about my emotions, absorbing everything so the other person never has to feel uncomfortable or guilty. I think, in her own way, my wife appreciates me. I think she knows I held things together, that I carried more than my share, that I showed up even when I was empty. But appreciation isn't the same as compatibility. Gratitude isn't the same as actually fitting together. You can appreciate someone and still not be right for them. You can be grateful for what they gave you and still recognize that the relationship costs more than it returns. Maybe the slap wasn't the whole story. Maybe it was never about that one moment. Maybe the real story is everything I absorbed afterward, every time I bit my tongue, every time I made an excuse, every time I told myself this is just temporary, or she's going through something, or if I just hold on a little longer, it'll get better. The slap was just the first time I learned that my pain didn't matter as much as her comfort. And I spent 17 years reinforcing that lesson, teaching myself, teaching her that I was the one who could take it, that I was the strong one, the patient one, the one who didn't need support because I was too busy providing it. And I'm so tired. I'm tired of being the strong one, the patient one, the one who absorbs everything. I'm tired of relationships that only work if I don't take up space. Next week, my lawyer is serving her divorce papers. I don't feel good about it. I don't feel victorious or relieved or any of the things people describe when they finally leave bad marriages. I feel sad, grieved. Like I'm mourning the death of something that's been dead for years, but I refuse to bury. I know how this looks from the outside. 17 years together, 2 kids, a man filing for divorce over something that happened when they were young and stressed. But it's not about the slap. It was never just about the slap. It's about 17 years of learning that my feelings came second, that my needs were negotiable, that my pain was less important than someone else's discomfort with that pain. It's about building a life where I functioned as emotional infrastructure instead of an actual person. It's about finally listening to the part of me that's been screaming for space but never got any. I've spent months in therapy unpacking this, making sure I'm not just running away, making sure this isn't some midlife crisis or burnout or temporary frustration. And every time I dig deeper, I come to the same conclusion. I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to grow old in a marriage where I can't express hurt without managing someone else's guilt about that hurt. I don't want to spend the next 30 years cooking every meal and handling every problem and absorbing every bit of emotional fallout so someone else can stay comfortable. I deserve more than that. Not because I'm special or exceptional, but because everyone deserves more than that. The hardest part is knowing she'll be hurt, that she'll cry, that she'll feel blindsided even though I've been disappearing for years. And part of me, the part that's been trained for 17 years, wants to back down, to say never mind and go back to keeping the peace. But I can't. I won't. Because if I do, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what I could have been if I'd chosen myself, if I'd given myself the same empathy I gave everyone else. I want to address something that's been sitting with me throughout this process. If the genders were reversed in my story, if a man had slapped a woman and then she spent 17 years making herself smaller to accommodate his emotions, people would immediately recognize it as abuse. They'd tell her to leave. They'd validate her hurt. They'd say she deserved better. But because I'm a man, the narrative gets complicated. Men aren't supposed to be hurt by a slap from a woman. We're supposed to be tough, to handle it, to not make it a big deal. Men aren't supposed to be victims of emotional dynamics where their feelings get buried under someone else's. That's not masculine. That's not how men are supposed to operate in relationships. And I internalized all of that. I told myself that real men don't complain. Real men carry the load. Real men protect their families even if it means destroying themselves in the process. But here's what I know now. Suffering in silence isn't strength. It's self-destruction. Being able to absorb endless dysfunction without breaking isn't admirable. It's tragic. I'm not trying to claim I'm a victim of domestic violence in the traditional sense. I'm not trying to compare my experience to people who have suffered years of physical abuse. But I am saying that what happened to me matters, that the pattern that developed matters. That emotional erasure is real and damaging regardless of gender. And I'm saying it out loud because I think there are other men, other people, living this same dynamic and telling themselves it's normal. That it's what partnership looks like. That their feelings are less important than keeping the peace. They're not, you're not. Your pain is real. Your needs are valid. Your desire to be seen and heard and valued in your own relationship is not asking too much. I don't know what happens after the divorce. I don't have some exciting new life planned. I'm not leaving her for someone else or chasing some fantasy of freedom. I'm just leaving, creating space for myself to exist without constantly managing someone else's emotional state. The kids are old enough to understand, sort of. We'll co-parent. We'll figure it out. I'm not abandoning them. I'm not choosing myself over them. I'm finally choosing myself alongside them, teaching them, by example, that you don't have to disappear to be loved. People keep asking if I'm sure. If 17 years is worth throwing away over communication issues. And I want to scream, it's not communication issues, it's existence issues. I couldn't exist fully in this marriage. I could function, I could provide, I could show up, but I couldn't be hurt, couldn't be angry, couldn't need support, couldn't take up space. And that's not a life. That's an extended performance of selflessness that destroys you from the inside out. I don't hate my wife. I don't think she's a monster. I don't think she intentionally destroyed me. I think we were two young people who created a dynamic that worked for her and slowly killed me. And by the time I realized it, I'd already trained myself, trained US, to operate that way. Breaking that pattern would require her to sit with guilt and discomfort and accountability. And every time we got close to that, she'd cry and I'd back down and we'd reset to the dysfunction we knew. So I'm not waiting for the pattern to break. I'm just leaving it. 17 years ago, my wife slapped me, and I brushed it off. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was a one-time thing, that we were young and stressed and it would never happen again. And it didn't happen again. Not the slap anyway, but what did happen over and over for 17 years was me learning that my pain wasn't as important as her comfort, that my needs were negotiable. That love meant absorbing everything so the other person never had to change. Maybe if I'd addressed it then, really addressed it, not just brushed it off, things would be different. Maybe we would have built a different dynamic. Maybe I would have learned earlier that I'm allowed to take up space. Or maybe not. Maybe this was always where we were headed. I'll never know. What I do know is that I'm finally, after 17 years of silence, listening to myself. And what I'm hearing is enough. Enough absorbing, enough excusing, enough disappearing. Next week my lawyer serves the papers. And I'll probably cry. Not because I'm sad about leaving, but because I'm grieving the 17 years I spent convincing myself I didn't deserve to be fully seen. I'm grieving the man I could have been if I'd chosen myself sooner. But I'm also, tentatively, carefully, hopeful. Hopeful that there's still time to figure out who I am when I'm not constantly managing someone else's emotions. Hopeful that I can rebuild a relationship with myself that isn't based on how much I can endure. Hopeful that the next chapter of my life will have space for me to exist, fully, without apology. If you're in a relationship where you've disappeared, where your feelings only matter after you've managed everyone else's first, I want you to know you're allowed to leave. You're allowed to choose yourself, even after years, even after kids, even after building a whole life together. You're allowed to say, this isn't working for me anymore, and I deserve better. You don't need permission. You don't need a dramatic reason. You don't need to wait until it's bad enough. You just need to listen to the part of yourself that's been asking for space, and then give it to yourself.